Harvard Divinity School.
100 Years Rudolf Steiner, December 15th and 16th, 2025.
So those are two wonderful presentations to follow, and they do very much relate to my topic. Can everybody hear me all right? Yeah? Although I am going to bring a kind of, it's a picture that complements. So I'm not going to focus on the anarchist side of Steiner's work. I'm going to focus in a way on the socialist side of Steiner's work. And I've been working, well, I'll say my title. My paper is looking at Steiner in relationship to democracy, but it's especially looking at the organizations that he helped design and how democracy lives in those organizations. And in such a short presentation, I'm actually not going to speak much about democracy, because from the very beginning, I would say to describe how Steiner designed organizations is, at least for me, but I'm assuming for everyone in the room, an unknown thing. So if you do have thoughts about how Steiner designed organizations afterwards, I would love to talk to you. But my experience, I'll just say as a very brief biographical picture, I've been working with Steiner's social ideas for around 20 years. And only up until about 3 years ago, I didn't think Steiner said anything about organizational development. When you read Steiner's books, lectures, there's not much in there, not directly about organizations. There's no lectures or articles where he speaks directly about organizations. And then in the secondary literature, if you read Bernard Leavenhood, what's been translated into English, which is all I can read, and some of the others, Dieter Brühl's been translated into English. In those works, they don't refer to Steiner in terms of what he said about organizations. They refer to what he said about the life processes or about the fourfold human being, and they bring their anthroposophical understanding to organizations. But it is the case that Steiner did actually speak a tremendous amount about organizations. And my interest in it is because most of us work in organizations, and hopefully I'll paint a picture of what a healthy organization looks like from my understanding, and hopefully that will help us in our work in organizations. I'm going to point to 7 aspects of a healthy organization. I'm really going to elaborate one, and I'm going to kind of do a lightning round with the other 6. And yeah, we'll see how that goes. I'm hopeful. I'll just say 3 years ago, what I encountered was I was reading through different memoirs, and I read a passage in a memoir by Herbert Hahn, who worked in the Waldorf Astoria cigarette factory with the workers doing education. And he described having a conversation with Steiner, where Steiner described what a healthy factory would look like. And what he described there was a new thought for me. And it was a new thought, but it totally radiated through everything I'd already read. So it made sense of everything I'd worked with in a different way. And that made me realize, of course, well, I didn't realize it in the moment, but over the last 3 years of working with this question, what did Steiner say about organizations? I've realized, yeah, of course, Steiner's not just talking about individuals and society at large. He's talking about us working in groups together, in organizations together, and what should that look like? So how I would describe, there are 2 main fundamental social laws. I'm not going to try to do both. It's very limited time. The fundamental sociological law. In 1920, Steiner referred back to this as the law of individualism. And that is the fact that we are becoming more and more individualized. Human beings need to become more and more themselves. But the other law, what's referred to as the fundamental social law, Steiner referred to as the law of socialism. Or the law of social life. And hold on. And I'm going to read that law. In a community of people working together, the well-being of the community will be the greater, the less that the individual claims for themselves the proceeds of their work, i.e., the more of these proceeds they make over to their fellow human beings, and the more their own requirements are satisfied not by their own work, but by the work of others. So he's clearly speaking about a group or an organization. It's a community of people working together. It's not just the community you grew up in, your town or region. And he's speaking about if we're in a community together and that community is healthier, the more that we work selflessly for each other. We're not working out of self-interest. So this picture of a selfless organization, this is one aspect of it. And then the question becomes, what are the other aspects of a selfless organization? And that's how I'm gonna kind of frame what I would describe as a healthy organization, is a selfless organization in these terms. And I just wanna say a word, even though, so much good work so much has already been said that kind of informs what I'm trying to bring. But Steiner's social ideas, he did not see them as a utopian blueprint. It wasn't that, he had some great ideas about how society should form and we should all do that. He, like all of his work, was describing this is how society is evolving. This is how human beings are evolving. The social forms that we create out of our soul life, out of what lives in us. And what we would have created 100 or 1,000 years ago is radically different than what we can create today. So the social forms we can create today, what's really like the potential, what's most living in us as a desire to realize. So the desire for freedom. You can feel this, just the culture wars in our country. Anytime someone's saying this is what we have to learn in the schools, someone else says no, like this is what we have to. Everybody wants to, a little bit what's been described with the state. People want to be able to. It's the First Amendment. They want to be able to bring their own beliefs, their own ideas. They want to live according to their own ideals. So freedom is a quite strong impulse in the human soul today. And so I'm just using that as an example. Steiner's saying this is what lives in human beings and what are the right forms to give it expression. He came to threefolding. But in our organizations, I'm not going to speak about the freedom aspect of it so much. I'm going to try to focus on the social aspect. So I'm going to do this lightning round of 6 aspects, and then I'm going to really focus on the 7th aspect. The 7th aspect is the one that's concerned with the Herbert Hahn quote, which I'll read. And some of these people will know for sure. They're not all totally revolutionary. I'm not. I just started to pull everything together for the first time for myself. So the first is how an organization should be oriented to the outer world, a business, let's say, that should be consumer driven. If our impulse is selflessness, if it's to serve others' needs, clearly that should be the impulse of the whole business. And the idea is that we would never create artificial needs for our goods through marketing. But instead, Steiner describes how instead of a company sending its agents out to try to kind of sell their wares, the company should wait until the basically consumer associations send their agents to them saying what to produce. So the kind of picture, I'll try to give examples of a CSA, community supported agriculture, where you gather the community around the farm so that the farmer is not just producing for some community out there, but they know exactly who they're producing and they can get feedback from that community, is a picture of this. What is a kind of pull economy where production is being pulled out of the producers as opposed to a push economy where we're trying to push things onto people? So that's the kind of largest orientation. Next, a picture of ownership, a healthy picture of ownership. Steiner speaks about if we really want to meet needs, obviously we need the most capable people to meet those needs. We need the best bakers, the best plumbers, the best chefs cooking, and they need land, they need machinery, they need the means of production to do their work. So how should ownership be passed on? Should it just be bought and sold, which is how we do it today? Is wealth the best criteria for meeting people's needs? If the baker retires, should the wealthiest person in town be able to buy their bakery and transform it however they want? If the criteria is that the most capable should have access to the means of production and wealth is not a useful criteria, then we need to think of how do we move the means of production from the capable to the capable? And so Steiner describes a form of ownership that you could call circulating or temporary ownership, which is, it is kind of basically a gift ownership, a gifting of ownership. So community land trusts, where the community buys up a piece of farmland in this instance, these exist. And then they find a farmer who can farm it according to organic or biodynamic or whatever they want. So that is a kind of picture of this existing. Also steward ownership, which Patagonia just became a steward-owned company. That came out of Europe, and it's becoming quite a large movement. So steward ownership is also another example of this kind of ownership. Compensation. Steiner spoke about how the wage system is a lie. Human labor is not actually a commodity. If we're all in a company together producing some goods, let's say body care products, those, because I'm thinking of Badger Balm up in New Hampshire, those products those are commodities. The people who are working there giving their time is not a commodity. They are apples and oranges. So what's actually happening in the company is that we're all working together, and then we're producing these things, and income comes in. How should the income be divided? So I think Libby said it this morning, income sharing. That's how Steiner envisioned it, needs-based, where the income comes in and we have to figure out how are we going to divide it so everyone's needs are met. We're all human beings. We're all in partnership here. We're all colleagues and coworkers. Of course, there's still leadership. There are still different capacities. But yeah, when it comes to this. So Camp Hill, which has just been described, is a community that tries to work in this way. And that does work in this way very successfully in certain instances. So those are the first three. The other three are a little bit more nebulous. Now we're getting into the organization itself. Freedom is the most important in a way, and so how you can imagine a rigid hierarchy. How organizations are often run is not something Steiner's promoting. He's working with a picture of organic leadership, or natural authority is the term he uses. So the people who are capable, the people who have the time to take up certain tasks. The first Waldorf school, he describes how a natural authority kind of comes in, because some teachers are more efficient and they have more time to take up certain tasks. Some teachers know more, people go to them for advice. So yeah, a kind of natural authority emerges. There are forms for this, especially in the Waldorf school, and that I think he gave, although I'm not 100% sure, this kind of mandate system where you would empower people. If you're all working to serve needs and you're all really inspired to do that work, you want people to really take up their tasks. So you could give them mandates and say, like, yes, please take care of enrollment. And that means oversee enrollment, like do this for us. So some people, Valentin Bember in Europe is really someone who says from the very beginning, there's a kind of democratic process where we delegate people to take up certain tasks in a time-dated way for a year, for 6 months, for a few years. It's also a kind of fluid leadership. But that brings it into a little bit more form. And then there's a number of places where Steiner talks about working with and through each other. And this is perhaps the most esoteric. He speaks about it in Brotherhood and the Struggle for Existence and elsewhere, that we all have our opinions, but if we're trying to really work with each other, especially in this selfless way, we need to search out in our colleagues' eyes, what is it that lives in them that's trying to come to expression? And then there's a kind of, he describes in other places, an arithmetic mean. No one's really right. No one's completely right. No one's completely wrong. Can we feel like what's living in the group and what's trying to emerge? So this working with and through each other, it's a little bit of I'm still trying to grasp it entirely, but that's one of the pictures. And then the last I'm going to share in these 6 is a properly threefolded organization. So people who work with threefolding very often sometimes try to do organizational development by saying, well, we should have 3 spheres, 3 committees within the organization. They should all be independent of one another. And then we've threefolded the organization. But as you can imagine, a factory is very different from a newspaper, is very different from a church. So in every organization, in all of social life is threefold. There's always the life of the mind always plays some role. Capacities always play some role. There's always a kind of agreements and rights between us, and there's always, transforming the world through work. And so how do these 3 balance each other? How could they live differently? And he gives a really beautiful description about a newspaper organization, and about the editors and writers and how they need to be separate from the publishers. But yeah, I'm not going to go any deeper into that. So the last thing is Herbert Hahn. And this is what I found that set me going. And this is also the thing that I think is the most important. I think it's the key to everything else, personally. Yeah, Soren's excited. So he says, no, first I have to pull back 1 second. Why would we ever work selflessly for each other? It's such a naive dream. This is not what we're doing. We're working out of self-interest. And Steiner says, yeah, self-interest is an engine. So what do we replace self-interest with? So in the essay where he gives this fundamental social law, he says, there is one thing needed to begin with. If any person works for another, they must find in this other person the reason for their work. And if any person works for the community, they must perceive and feel the meaning and value of this community and what it is as a living organic whole. So you have to replace self-centeredness, self-interest with an actual seeing, with knowledge, with insight, with an experience of meaning of the work that's taking place, of who these people are. So this last point I would call seeing the whole. And the social motto was spoken last night. So I'm just going to say the first part of it. The healthy social life is found when, in the mirror of each human soul, the whole community finds its reflection. And then he goes on to say this more kind of individualistic part, and when in the community, the virtue of each one is living. But this first part, anthroposophists in the room will have been to meetings, countless meetings where they spoke this social motto at the beginning of the meeting. And it's this kind of beautiful aspirational thought. But Steiner, this is what I found from Herbert Hahn, is it's meant to be an objective reality and it's meant to be enacted. So how do we enact it? And this is why Herbert Hahn blew my mind. The essential thing, Steiner said to Herbert Hahn, is to create for every worker and employee a picture of the whole of their work and also of its place and setting in the world. All the employees should be told about all the work done in the other departments. It's the Waldorf cigarette factory. He says, they should also be given a picture of the tobacco plant itself, of the regions where it's cultivated, of the civilization in the countries concerned. Over and above this, they should be told about the whole process of the distribution of the finished product. Rudolf Steiner thought that this might be achieved by means of lectures and introductory courses. Something like a syllabus of production should be worked out for each industrial firm. Every business should have its own syllabus of production. He also thought that individual workers might be invited to visit other departments. They could go first as observers and later on be given opportunities for practical participation. So you have a picture of an incredibly, it's just a very vibrant learning organization. Peter Senge has done work around that, but this is, for me, quite radical. So when I read this, there's these snippets in Steiner's other work where he says similar things. I'm just going to read one of them. Business matters should be discussed at regular meetings between the employer and the employee so that the latter, the employees, continually have an overview of what is happening. The employer should be required at any moment to tell the employee exactly what is happening and discuss all its details with him so that the factory or company is embedded in a shared culture. Everything will be transparent. So, this is a picture of a radically transparent organization where everybody understands the meaning of their work. And so if we think about the initial picture of Camp Hill, how much diversity was in there. The picture here is that Steiner's trying to create an organization with a shared culture. And he says, you think this is way too many meetings, but actually if you have inner unity, then the work just flies because you're actually inspired by the work. You're not just dragging all day and going onto Instagram and doing whatever you're doing. So this is the kind of main picture. And all of what I've described is in different places. I just mentioned Peter Senge. Steiner brings it together in this really organic, evolutionary, wholesome way. But the other aspect I'll just touch on to close is Steiner is talking about the meaning of the work being the whole, but it's also, he says there, we have to know its place and setting in the world. And he describes in these different quotes, we have to get outside the walls of our organization. We have to know what our work is actually trying to achieve in the world. So the example of this is the Waldorf school, the first Waldorf school. The Waldorf schools were always called the Freie Waldorfschule, the free or independent Waldorf schools. And Steiner, when he describes the Waldorf schools, he says, this is a few very short quotes, the Waldorf school can be successful only if it is completely inspired by the spirit that aspires towards the threefold nature of the social organism. So there's this movement for social and societal transformation. The Waldorf School is trying to kind of be a wedge to bring about independence in education. The possibility of the Waldorf School must be used in order to bring about reform and revolution in the school system. And last, it is through our interest in the world that we must first gain the enthusiasm we need for the school and for our work. So just a picture, we're living and working in our organizations. We know what the meaning of that work is. We go home, we check the news, the world is burning, and we don't know how our work actually relates to the outer world. And this is the bridge that Steiner's saying we need to cross. We need to show our workers, if you're a Waldorf teacher, you are working with those students in that classroom, but like, what is it working towards in the field of education? What is it working towards in culture more generally? What is the larger societal transformation we're trying to enact? And that's in every field. So to kind of break through those walls, which for me means needing to like grapple with an understanding of society, which means threefolding, but obviously for different people that will look differently. But that is the kind of final picture of a healthy organization as I understand it. Thank you.
Sponsored by the Program for the Evolution of Spirituality.
Copyright 2023, Preston Fellows of Harvard College.